University, I, Khushi Goyal, welcome you all to the fourth edition of our annual business conclave, Imbizo. We are an organization working to promote the startup ecosystem in the society and enable the youth in the country to take up challenges and establish world changing companies. Our annual business conclave, Imbizo, is a platform where renowned entrepreneurs from various fields come together and guide students towards a better path in life. I welcome our honorable faculty members and audiences. I request everyone to kindly mute their mics and not present their screens. If you have any queries or questions, you can type in the chat box. We will take them up in the end of the session. To grace our speaker session today, we have with us Mr. Mikhil Inani. With 10 plus years of experience in building products from scratch, Mr. Mikhil Inani is the managing director and CEO at Apollo Finvest, which enables any company to start lending in under 48 hours. Prior to Apollo Finvest, Mr. Inani headed consumer products and growth at Hotstar and Coupon Dunya. He has also co-founded PharmEasy, India's largest online medicine delivery startup valued at over $1 billion. Thank you for joining us, sir. It is an absolute pleasure to host an inspiring personality like you. We have been eagerly waiting to hear your insights on today's topic, scaling a startup. The floor is all yours, sir.
All right. Firstly, apologize because I ended up coming late. I don't like to keep people waiting, but my previous meeting just ran over. Thank you so much for having me. It's a real pleasure to be here. Um, this topic is super interesting, right? I think scaling a startup, and before I kind of talk a little bit about that, I want to kind of focus a little bit on how do you basically go about thinking about doing a startup in the first place, and then get to the fun part, which is scaling an startup, right? So I think a lot of people basically struggle about this concept, and I think there's a lot of obviously media focus right now on being an entrepreneur and really glamorizing that, right? Why that's really fantastic and very, very encouraging. I think it's important to understand in on a very, very personal level, right? Is this something which you're interested in at all, right? Because fundamentally, being an entrepreneur, as an example, or working in a startup is far from a bed of roses, essentially, right? It's a lot of hard work, and it comes at the cost of a lot of a person's sacrifice, right? So it's incredibly important for people to take that decision in a very conscious state, right? Don't do it because it's being over glamorized by the media, or there are people watching Shark Tank as an example, and if you're doing anything else, apparently you're not very successful in life. That's absolutely not true. I think ultimately you should be doing something which makes you really, really happy. But at the same point in time, if you have made that decision that you would like to dive into entrepreneurship at some point in your career, I think the best thing to do really is prepare for entrepreneurship, right? And the best way to prepare for entrepreneurship is the following, right? When you're in college, as an example, you should look at doing a variety of projects, right? Because they're like pseudo startups in many ways, and these projects really help you understand how do you work well with others, right? Because that's what ultimately being a good entrepreneur is. It is working very well with others as well. So that's point one, right? Point two is when you're looking for job opportunities, right? After your graduation, as an example, the focus should be to find jobs in early stage companies, right? In many ways, the reason for this, right, is because before being an entrepreneur, you should try and be the closest thing to an entrepreneur, which is an early stage team member, right? Over there, you will get all the rules and responsibilities of that of a startup, but without necessarily, having the downfalls of a startup and an entrepreneur basically with you, right? So, as an example, for me, early on in my career, when I started out my journey, after graduation, I became the head of product at a company called Coupon Dunya, but I was the fourth employee there, right? There were barely any team members there. So over there, I got the opportunity to kind of, work very, very closely with the founder and engage with him in a capacity which gave me a complete insight into what it took to be an entrepreneur, right? And that was very, very useful for me, as an example, Because when it came time for me to be an entrepreneur, I understood key concepts like how do you actually go about hiring, how do you think about team culture, what is really the most important thing when you go about building a company, right? So in many ways, that was like my training wheels. You know, I would say you have the roles and responsibilities that of an entrepreneur, but without really having the risk of it, right? So that's a very important aspect for you to kind of build up in your career, right? Because whenever people say that they want to basically have their own startup, for me that's a red flag, because it's like kind of wanting to come out and say that I want a love marriage, right? You can't force that. You have to naturally find it. So that's the same thing about entrepreneurship and your idea, right? Because you can't decide one day and be like, I'm going to do a startup, right? Organically, number one, you have to train yourself for it. Number two, organically in your journey, right, you will actually end up finding opportunities and ideas depending on your own work experience and your variety of personal experiences also, where you can draw upon, find problems, and then decide that what, you are the best person, or your team is the best team basically, to solve that problem comprehensively and in a world class manner, right? So in order for you to be able to do that, right, one is you should train yourself by giving and putting yourself in a position by which you're replicating that of a founder by being in an early stage company. Second is also in your career, right? Choose every job opportunity exactly like how you guys choose your college, right? Which is determining, which has the best managers as an example, right? That's a pseudonym for basically teachers, right? Typically, you want to go to a college which has great teachers, go to a company which has great managers, right? You want to go to a college which has amazing other students as an example, right? Similarly, you kind of should basically go to a startup which has other great team members, because ultimately that becomes your alumni, right? Because tomorrow, eventually, when you have your own startup, you can dive into that network, hire the same set of people, or take their help in solving a variety of problems, right? That is something which has helped me across my last 11 years of building companies, right? Um, the third thing which is very important, right, is to understand before you kind of take a job, what is it that you hope to learn in this job, right? And where can this take you next, right? Because everything in life is a stepping stone, right? And iteratively, you must improve, right? So I think before you take on every job, understand that, does this link really well to the career trajectory that you want to have, right? Which is basically, as an example, if you want to be an entrepreneur, consciously understand that what are the kind of skill sets you hope to learn in this particular job, and make sure you're doing that by raising that point with your manager, right? Saying that, hey, I'm here to contribute X, Y, and Z, but my hopes and aspirations from this job is to improve my ability in X, Y, and Z as well, right? So it becomes extremely clear. You become very, very focused, and every job is a means to an end, as an example for you, right? And this is very, very pivotal, right? Once you have this in place, right, at some point in time in your career, you will come across an idea which will feel perfect for you. You will be passionate to solve it, and plus you'll have the right skill set and the network to be able to solve that problem in a world class manner, right? Here, when you find this problem, right, that's the time you should be basically thinking of getting into an entrepreneurship mindset, right? Doing your own startup as an example, because you're well equipped, plus you found an idea that you're passionate about and well suited to solve. Now, when you go about solving these problems, right, the first thing you guys should be doing is basically solving a very niche and narrow problem statement, right? Uh, the easiest way to fail in a startup, right, is to solve a problem which is too big, right? Or go very, very wide, as an example, or very horizontal in solving a problem, or solving a very generic problem. Always try and narrow your audience, as an example, right? And and
Recording in progress.
at that point in time, you will have the ability to solve a very specific problem, which is extremely niche, but you solve it in a world class manner, right? The reason why this kind of works and this approach is very, very useful is because, no matter what company you are, you're always competing with other larger companies, right? But other larger companies, no, they don't have the luxury to actually solve niche problems. They always have to solve larger problems because they are that big, right? As an example, you never see Google basically coming out with a product which solves it for like 1,000 users, as an example, right? They always have to think in millions. But you, as a startup, which is probably 5 to 10 people inside your company, can actually solve a problem first for 100 people, right? And then, go incrementally to 1,000, and then keep, slowly keeping on increasing the users that you're solving the problem for, right? But the secret ingredient over there, right, is to first build a product which your first 100 users absolutely love, right? Because they should feel like there is no other product out there which solves their exact problem as well as these 100 people, as this startup basically is doing it for me, right? It should be like almost like they should be in love literally with your product, right? When you have that, right, your net promoter score, right, there's this concept as net promoter score. It basically means that when you talk to your customers, they should be basically raving about your product and talking about it with their friends and colleagues, and organically the product should be growing, right? When you have that, right, you have discovered magic, right? When you discovered that magic, you should try and take that singular product that you have kind of built and take it to as many number of customers who you think this product will be perfect for, right? And get to an organic basically local optimization, right? This is what I call it, right? Basically, uh, necessarily when you're thinking about the customers that you're solving this for, right? Build a narrow product and take it to every single customer, whoever you think this product would be amazing for, and the conversion rate should be very, very high, right? Because if the conversion rate is very high, retention is very high, that means you have some magic, right? And until this is done, right, until you have high retention and at the same point in time you don't have high conversion, don't expand your product, right? Because this is a common mistake which is done, by startups to mid-stage to large-stage companies, that without really having product market fit, right, they end up expanding their scope. And when you expand your scope, you dilute your offering, right? And by default, in a small company cannot build a world-class product which is very wide in nature, right? Because it requires more resources, as an example, right? And when it requires more resources, it is by default you're setting yourself up for failure, right? Because as a startup you don't have the resources, right? So you should focus on a very niche problem. Now, another very important aspect, right, when it comes to problem solving, is something which I called as the founder market fit, right, which I already hinted at before. But every time you think about solving a problem and thinking about basically doing a startup in a particular space, right, always think that every person has superpowers. Okay, like as an example, if you make Sachin Tendulkar play football, right, he won't be as good as Ronaldo, as an example, right? But if you make Ronaldo also play cricket, he won't be as good as Sachin, right? Every founder and every team member is exactly the same, right? You have to make Sachin play cricket so that he can be Sachin Tendulkar, right? Similarly, you have to think about yourself as well. What are your superpowers, right? Are you great at operations? Are you great at tech? Are you great at, maybe organizing, as an example, right? Whatever things, your superpower as a founder and as a team is, play to your strengths, right? And attack those kind of problems, basically, right? Um, Also look into your past, as an example, right? And every single day when you're looking and building this company, you should always think to yourself that why do you have an unfair advantage of solving this problem, right? And if you don't believe that that's the case in the start, right, there should be a clear strategy where over a period of time you will be able to develop this moat, basically, right, or develop this phenomena which is called basically the ability to have uh, a clear reason why you are getting every day better than anybody else in the room at solving this problem, right? You along with your team. So this is very, very important, right? Either you have this in the start or you have it to a certain degree in the start, but you constantly keep building on it, right? So this is what I call unfair advantage, essentially, right? It's very, very critical to have that. Now, once you develop kind of an unfair advantage as well, right? This is fundamentally, killer and important, because then your product keeps improving over a period of time, which leads to more and more attention, more and more customers, as an example. And at the same point in time, your competitors find it that much more difficult to compete with you, right? Because every day you're improving, and they can't run as fast as a person who's a little bit ahead already, right? Now, once you've achieved product market fit and founder market fit, right, you're in the magic zone, right? And at that point in time, what you should be doing is thinking about how do you expand mind share and wallet share with your existing set of customers, right? Now, as an example, when we were at Farm Easy, right, the first thing that we basically launched, right, was we launched a very simple app which allowed people to order medicines online, right? But the minute we ordered, we built that app and we had great, founder market fit, product market fit, right? The next thing we started thinking was, how do we expand our wallet share with these and mind share with these customers, right? And we started doing a thorough analysis and talking to customers, right? And the three things you should ask customers and try to figure out is their entire journey, right? What do they do before they use your product? How do they use your product? And what do they do after using your product, right? So as an example, in pharmacy's case, it was very clear that before they used our product, they went to the doctor to get a prescription. Once they got a prescription, they used to find a chemist nearby to place this order. And after that, once the medicines came in, they used to set reminders on their phone as to when should they have their medicines, right? And obviously, after that, before going to the next doctor's visits, they would again do a diagnostic test to get the health reports, which they would then submit to the doctor. Over a period of time, if you have seen what pharmacy has been basically doing, right, we have solved every aspect of this, right? Like pretty much everything which I said now is part of the pharmacy app, right? And this is where the magic lies, right? Where first you solve some problem in an extremely niche and vertical manner, and then slowly you kind of horizontally move, in one direction or the other. And every time you move horizontally in one direction, you solve that in a world-class manner, right? You repeat the trick that you did first time, right? Which is solving one problem vertically, doing it really well. Then you go a little bit more horizontal, solve that problem really well vertically, and go into depth, right? Every time you solve a problem, go into depth and go into nuance, because that's what defeats the competition, right? Because most people always want to solve the problem in a very generic way, right? People don't want to take that extra effort of solving something in a world class in a very, very deep fashion, right? Because they always think that, why am I solving it for such a precise use case, right? Let me just make a generic solution and then let the customers figure it out, right? But that is the huge mistake, because before you can walk, you should not think about running, right? It's the same concept in startups, right? Before you have 1,000 users, don't think about having millions of users, right? First, make 1,000 users happy, then have the dream of having millions and billions of users, right? So that focus is very, very critical. Now, once you're able to establish this magic zone, essentially, right, and where you're expanding your wallet share and mind share with customers as well, then comes the next, part, which is hiring, right? Because now you found a startup which is having product market fit, founder market fit, it's growing, you're expanding wallet share, mind share with customers, it's going positively, right? Now, the next thing you'll want to do is obviously build on your team, because, the way I think about startups, right, is there are broadly two phases in a startup, right? The first phase in a startup is typically when you're going from 0 to 100, right? And if I have to give it, very kind of a simple way to think about it, right? 0 to 100 is like an Iron Man movie, and 100 to 1,000 is like an Avengers movie, right? Because when you're going 0 to 100, the enemy that you're facing, right, it can be solved by Iron Man, and usually Iron Man is the founder, basically, right? You can take on any problem, and you yourself are good enough to solve the problem, right? But when you're taking a startup from like 100 to 1,000, the problems are next level, right? And if the problems are next level, if you're Iron Man alone, you probably get defeated. But that's when you basically call up the Avengers and get the team in place, right? And this is where you actually should devote tremendous amount of time in hiring. As an example, like literally, one of the things I highly recommend to entrepreneurs is that probably spend 70% of your time or 60% of your time with your customers, new and existing, and spend the balance 30 to 40% only hiring, right? If you just do these two things in the company, everything else will kind of take care of itself, right? So this is how I take hiring very, very critically importantly, right? And when it comes to hiring, right, the way to think about hiring is always go into your network, right, and basically hire the best people you've ever worked with, do whatever it takes to get them in on board, essentially, right? Because once you have them, your life will be very, very smooth and sorted. If you're not able to hire good people, it doesn't matter which company you are, you are bound to failure, right? Because like I said, it's basically an Avengers level problem. Only one of the two things happen with companies which fail to hire well, right? Either they remain a company which is small to medium, which is that 0 to 100 zone, or they actually die, because a bad hire has the capability not only to do a bad job and prevent you from moving forward, but actually it creates a bad environment, bad culture, which causes the good people to leave, right? So there's a very simple thing which I follow, right? As an example, if you hire A plus people, they will hire other A plus people, and you'll be surrounded by A plus people, right? But if you hire a B plus person, that person will hire a C person, that person will hire a D person, and you'll be surrounded by morons very soon, right? Uh, and this is a real problem when it comes to scaling a startup, right? Because uh, usually when you follow a very textbook approach when it comes to product management and building products, right? You can solve for that in a very disciplined manner when it comes to customers, right? But the big challenge is hiring, right? And for that, you should go into your network, hire the best people within 1 degree of connection, right? And who makes the best people, to hire? They are people who usually you have worked with, as an example, or in college you have done college projects, right? And you guys played well with each other. It's not necessary, by the way, a good family member or a friend will make a good hire, right? Because you may be the best of friends, you can party together and have a great time, but maybe you guys are terrible working together, right? So these are things which happen in real life. So you need to understand who is it that you work really the best with, and that's really the question you should be asking yourself, right? Um, you can hire up to a certain extent using this philosophy. Then, in order to further scale the company, right, you should basically give a lot of incentive and power to the A plus people to go out and become, basically in charge of hiring, right? Because A plus people have also the same expectations and cultural mindset as the entrepreneur, right? That's why you think they're A plus. So if you give them the power to hire, what will end up happening is that they will also make sure that they're hiring quality people in the company, right? And this is very important, right? Because usually what I've seen in companies is they don't give so much importance to hiring, and there's some random HR who's sitting and doing this, right, with minimal involvement with the key people because the key people are too busy, quote unquote, right, doing their day job. But that's a recipe for disaster, because while short term that may have benefits because the company is doing well short term, the best people are actually sitting and working, but long term it's disaster because basically when you get bad people into the company, right, eventually you have to fire them, and that's what happens. And when you fire people in the company, it causes a bad environment, right? Because people feel that this company is not stable, I don't have my job security, blah blah blah, all of these things start coming out, right? So this is why hiring is very very important, right? Like you should optimize for this because it will give you the best ROI. Two things give the best ROI if you're an entrepreneur, right? Talking to customers and hiring. The guaranteed, tremendous amount of ROI, right? Every other thing is questionable, but these two things always give you tremendous good ROI, right? Now, the last topic before I open it up for questions, right, is going to be about fundraising, because that's, something which people really, really like, basically talking about, or it's very glamorized, basically. Um, Fundraising is basically, a very fancy way of taking a very high interest rate loan. That's what it is, right? It's not put across that way because, unfortunately, the media is not really good at economics. So they talk about it, or this company's raised $100 million, amazing. It's all money which, it's a very, very high interest loan, which the investor is expecting you to return 7 to 8 times, right? So my always 2 cents on this, right, is when you're, firstly, this is your company. If you're building a company, it's very important to understand economics, right? Because it's a lot of hard work when you're basically, doing a startup. And the last thing you want to do is reduce your chances of financial success, right? Uh, and here, what tends to happen, right, is whenever you raise funds, your valuation goes up. And while it's very amazing to feel like, oh, I have a company valued at $1 billion, the problem statement there is that you have to ensure basically there is an exit to the company at $1 billion or a $10 billion or whatever it is. Because if you don't, if the company gets sold, you know, equity holders, right, whoever holds your equity, they are first in line to make money. Uh, so if anything successful happens, they are the first in line to take their money out, and they won't take just their money out, they want to take a multiple of their money out. So whenever you raise equity, right, you put people in front of you to make money in case you're successful. It's like selling, in a way, tickets to your success. But if you're successful, somebody else makes the most money first, and then balance money comes to you. And that's how actually equity world works. Right? That's why people are dying to angel invest, and people are dying to basically, invest into tech startups, etc. Because people are kind of betting on really, really smart individuals to do a good job, and they know they'll get some kind of exit. So that money will first come to them, right? And then, by the way, expectation on this capital is also crazy, right? It's not like 10, 20%, 30%, but it's actually like multiple times, right? They want a 10x return, right? So every time you raise capital, right, you're raising expectations. So this is very critical for every entrepreneur to know about, because sometimes it is actually better to not raise any external capital and build this thing, successfully and profitably by yourself, because probably you can build businesses which will give you profits which you and a job can never make, right? Plus your company is of good value as well, and you have 100% control over the company, and you're never in a situation where probably investors can even throw you out, right? As we've seen publicly happen many times, right? So it's very critical to think about these things. Also, when you're fundraising, figure out, do you need permanent capital? Because equity capital is permanently giving away equity, right? Or are you even okay with debt capital, right? If you're okay with debt capital, it may be a smarter thing to do, because you can over a period of time pay it off with your revenue as well, right? And you hold 100% of your equity, right? So these are some things which you should always keep in mind while doing basically fundraising, right? Also, when you're doing fundraising, really optimize, right? Before you talk to an investor, do due diligence on them, right? Do you want money from them, right? Because the first instinct of our entrepreneur early stages, they want any money from anybody, right? And that's a recipe for disaster, because that's again like saying, I want to get married to anybody. I just want to get married, right? Because basically that's guaranteed going to end badly, right? It's the same thing with investors. You should take very smart decisions, because once they're on your cap table, everything is going to be signed by them, and everything is also going to be approved by them. If they come in your way to do something you really want to do, you're screwed, right? Because eventually you'll be very frustrated, because for them this will be one out of 1,000 investments that they made, but this is your only company, and this is what you're doing 24/7. So again, very consciously do due diligence on these investors. Make sure that their other portfolio companies are actually happy having them on board, right? There are a lot of investors out there who basically are actually terrible investors, right? From an entrepreneur's point of view. So do your due diligence just the way they do your due diligence, right, on you, right? And imagine you're just one out of 1,000 companies that they invest in, but they do so much due diligence on you, right? And but this is your only company, so you should be doing due diligence to the next level on them, right? Like, so always keep that in mind, right? It's something that you should want. You should be excited about that. Listen, I'm going to have this person on my board, or I'm going to have this person on the cap table. It's going to be very useful, because this person is amazing. I've got amazing reviews about them. You should be excited, right? It's almost like adding a team member into the company who's like a CXO. That's the kind of research you should be doing on them, right? And if you're not convinced, it's okay. Don't take rushed calls, because again, this is in life. There are always two kinds of decisions, right? One is reversible, one is not reversible. This is sort of irreversible. So those are decisions which you really think strongly about, right? That being said, I'll pause, because there's a huge density of information which I've given. I want to open it up for questions as well. So if you have any questions, would love to kind of take them.
That was indeed a delightful speech. You brought points so forward that are relevant and important to understand for a better future. So to hear more of your interesting thoughts, we will now move on to the question answer session. So, sir, the first question I have for you is, since pharmacy was one of the very first e-commerce platforms involved in selling online medicines, diagnostics, healthcare, and online doctoral consultations, how difficult was it for you to convince Indians that this platform is
Recording
reliable?
stopped.
Yeah, I mean,
Recording in progress.
Honestly, what we ended up doing right at that point in time is so I'll tell you the challenges, right? The challenges essentially was that how do we prove, to basically our customers that we are legitimate, right? Because again, these are medicines and people are very sensitive, right? Because in the north, especially, right, in North India, there's this concept of people even sell fake medicines, by the way, right? And that's a huge problem. So what we basically ended up doing, right, is we used to basically have barcodes on every single medicine, right, which would actually be authentication barcodes, which we ourselves in the situation where any customer would call us up, right, and tell us that, can you prove that this medicine is kind of legit? We would have the barcode directly, which was linked to the manufacturer and the distributor. So the entire value chain, we could actually show this customer, where does this medicine come from, which branch of basically even the manufacturer, right? Like as an example, if it's Glaxo, right, we would be able to tell you from which part of the country Glaxo's distributor has this come from, right? And that gave people a lot of confidence, right? And I think the second thing which was very, very critical is basically the entire user experience that we gave people, right? Where they would basically not only get this barcode, but they would also get a legitimate bill and the name of the pharmacy where through which this was coming, right? So many times this used to be a local pharmacy that they are aware of, right? So that would give them other additional confidence that it's not some random company. It's not pharmacy as an example. I'm trusting. I know this pharmacy which is there around. It's pretty decent. It has we're well associated with it over a period of the last 20 years or so. So we know this medicine is kind of legitimate, right? And I think the third piece which really we did very well, right, was that controlled expansion, right? So as an example, day zero, we didn't go into 10 cities, right? We actually did very, very slowly rollouts, right? We went into one city, made sure that our operations were world class over there, right? And in many ways, that also leads to trust, right? Because what happens is, because India is, and the world is so hyper connected, right? Whenever we used to launch a city, people used to be actually excited to use us, right? So there was that anticipation and that excitement that, oh, it's available in my city now, I'm going to order, right? Because it was so well trusted and received in another city. Whenever we launched another city, that was that excitement and positivity was there in that city as well, right? So in this way, we made sure that operations were world class. There was general excitement built across in other cities, and that helped us launch really, really well there. And then organically, people used to tell their friends in that excitement that, hey, there's pharmacy which is available. It's giving you medicines at a very, very affordable rate. Since you also have parents and you have grandparents for whom you're ordering medicine, you should definitely use that. It's very convenient. So that also helped us basically get that early adoption. And then obviously, things like barcode, things like, the nearby pharmacies that we basically were getting the medicines from, that gave them basically additional confidence on us.
All right, so that was really informative. I didn't know that's how the pharmacy business or online pharmacy business works. So, sir, since we know that fintech startups require capital to scale innovations and non-traditional loan offerings, how do you plan to establish that in an Indian market which is generally run by traditional norms?
Sure. So, can you just repeat the last part of the question?
Um, how do you plan to establish the non-traditional forms of loaning in an Indian market which is generally run by traditional norms?
Okay. So, I mean, very honestly, when it comes to, fintech, right, and, across the world as an example, right, in countries like the US, I'll give you an example, right, there, the GDP as an example, their average, salary made by an individual and the average ticket size of a loan, right, all of it is higher. Okay. And because all of this is higher, basically, there, fintech, I would say, is lesser important than India. Why? Because in India, right, 90% of India doesn't have access only to formal credit, right? Now, this is the reason for this is very important to understand, right? The reason for this is not because they are not credit worthy. The reason for this is they are credit worthy, but for very, very small ticket sizes, right? And the problem for traditional banks is that they cannot give out these 5,000-10,000 rupee loans because the cost of processing a loan, right, is the same as a 1 lakh rupee loan, right? Because they do all of the physical paperwork. There's a branch, there's a physical human being who's sitting and processing this. So if you're charging 500 rupees or 5,000 rupees to process a lakh rupee loan, right? If you charge, I don't know, 4,000 rupees to process a 5,000 rupee loan, it makes no sense, right? So that is the real problem statement in India, right? Like, this is the reason why branches have not worked, right? And we have just copied from the US, set up branches everywhere and serve the people, right? But this has only scaled to the top 10% of Indians, right? Which is 100 million people. Now, for the balanced people, there is no other option but to do it digitally, because you have to basically, literally, a branch has to be there on everybody's mobile phone, right? Because then the cost of processing and the cost of a transaction essentially becomes zero. And why is this possible today versus 5 to 10 years ago? Because thanks to the government, essentially, there is UPI, there is eKYC. All of these things are fundamentally game changing. And obviously, Geo, right? Like, honestly, the simplest way to kind of describe what Geo has done is it's added 2 more zeros in the target audience of every single, a digital company out there. And even in their valuation, it's probably added 3-4 zeros, right? It's that pivotal, right? So honestly, UPI and Geo are game changing, right? Like they're game changing. I'm pretty confident in 20 years time, they are going to be case studies which are going to be studied across multiple countries. Like this is like unbelievable world class execution which has been done by these two specific things, right? And to me that has enabled basically smartphone explosion, and that has enabled basically financial services to reach people where even roads don't go, right? And because of all of these things, the cost of processing and cost of transaction is trending towards zero. So now why is this exciting? Because then whether you're doing a 50 rupee loan, 500 rupee loan, or a lakh rupee loan or a 10 lakh rupee loan, right? The cost is the same, right? And it's all affordable. So that becomes very, very exciting because suddenly a new class of customers become eligible for taking credit, right? That's which is very important. That's the point number two, essentially, is even when it comes to insurance, right? India is highly under insured, right? And the reason for this is exactly the same. Now, over here also, we can actually start doing micro insurance for as small as 5 rupees because the infrastructure to accept, micro payments is already there in India. So these are, in my opinion, game changing things. And what will be even more game changing is the fact that tomorrow you're going to start having, people like Zomato, Swiggy, Ola, Uber, who already have massive distribution. They have merchants, they have customers. They all are going to start distributing financial services, right? Because the money is flowing through them. Ultimately, customers paying them, they are paying the merchant, right? So they are in control of that ecosystem. A restaurant on Zomato, the best person to lend to them is Zomato, right? Because if Zomato lends to them, the restaurant will actually scale up on Zomato, right? Which is beneficial for Zomato also from a revenue perspective, right? A bank can never dream of having the kind of close knit relationship with a restaurant as much as Zomato has, right? Zomato can bring them more orders. It can basically, gather all of the money also from customers for them. And Zomato can even collect their EMI from the money coming from customers itself, right? So a lot of benefits are there. So to me, as compared to even the West, right? If I compare India, India is where financial services are going to be next level, right? Because what was the past was a fraction, like it was 10% of the population being covered. I'm very confident that in the next 5 years we are going to see a 60 to 70% kind of coverage, right? And when that will basically happen, it's going to be very, very exciting because all of this will be largely done and driven by digital financial services.
So your brief check on economics was so comprehensive. I genuinely enjoyed listening to you. So my next question for you is, what was the motivational force that made you leave an already established company and start your own company from ground zero?
I think, very honestly, this is what I say, right? Like I said this in the start as well, where, you have to identify what makes you really, really happy, right? So to me, as an example, even when I was, doing my education, at Carnegie Mellon in 2010, I was very clear, like, I wanted to have a startup of my own, right? And, this comes from, a little bit of my upbringing because, in my family as well, there are a lot of entrepreneurs, as an example, who started, their businesses as their first generation. And honestly, even my friends and colleagues at, Carnegie Mellon were very, very ambitious, right? And that rubbed off on me big time, right? So as an example, I always tell people this, right? You're the average of the 5 people, you spend the most amount of time with, right? So choose those 5 people very, smartly, because whether you like it or not, you're going to become like them, right? So for me, like CMU was basically game changing because before that, very honestly, I was very, I would say I was ambitious but kind of uninspired, right? It's like you want to do something big in life, but you don't know what you want to do, right? That was me basically before CMU. But when I went into CMU, all the stars aligned, and largely I give the huge benefit of that to CMU, because it brought that discipline of working really, really hard, because we had assignments and we had tests and we had everything like that on a different planet, right? It was that hectic. And secondly, it all was easy to do because my friends over there and my colleagues over there, right? They were all just so inspired, right? Very honestly, I feel like I must have been the bottom 10 percentile over there, right? When I think about all of those guys, because they were like, all of them felt like next level, right? As compared to somebody like me as an example, right? And that was so inspiring. I just wanted to basically, in many ways, be like them, right? Where they had such good knowledge, they were so inspired, they knew what they wanted to do in life. And so honestly, through talking to them, is I understood where my passion lies. And then I realized I wanted to do my own company. And ever since then, I've always kind of, been in that entrepreneurial zone, right? Where I came back, I joined Coupon Dunia, which was a very tiny company. Didn't really care about brand, etc. Right? Like, Coupon Dunia, very honestly, even my family felt, number one, the website looked like a joke. And number two, the name also sounded like a college project, and there were 4 people inside a tiny office. They really were worried that this company is going to shut down. But I really didn't care about any of that, right? Even if the company shut down, I really joined that company because I felt like the founder over there was somebody I can learn a lot from, right? And honestly, that was the only thing I cared about. Everything else to me was secondary. Similarly, every single thing I've done in my life, right? Like, as an example, post that I did my own startup, which was Farm Easy. Then after Farm Easy, I wanted to experience something at really, really large scale. So I joined Hotstar. When Hotstar kind of got acquired by Disney, right? I kind of realized, back then that, a zebra can't change its stripes, right? Basically. And that once you've done your own startup notes, you will always have that itch of having your own company. And that's what it was for me as well, right? With Apollo, like, it was kind of inevitable, right, that I will find my way back into running my own company because that's how you kind of become wired, to be honest, right? But like I always say, right, you can't plan these things. As an example, right? Because for me, uh, when I was in Hotstar, there was no plan that after this I knew I wanted to do my own startup, but there was no plan. As an example, while going in, I wanted to get into financial services. It just organically happened because of experiences I was having within Hotstar, as an example, because a good part of our business was about collecting premium subscriptions, and my colleagues from the past, seeing the kind of challenges that they were seeing in the financial services space, and many of them had fintechs of their own, and understanding from them what the challenges are, and then obviously realizing that where we could come in and make a big difference.
So I'm definitely going to start evaluating the 5 friends I have in college after listening to you. So moving on, most of the people who fear entrepreneurship is because of the fear of rejection. So how did you personally and your team deal with rejection and negative views?
See, honestly, I'll tell you my thinking over here, right? Uh, I will tell you one very simple thing, right? Essentially, uh, you know, most people in life, right, will tell you it's not possible, right? Like, because 95% of the people are armchair critics, right? But history remembers people who basically try and fail or try and succeed. History never remembers people who don't try, right? You'll never hear about somebody who thought that they wanted to create the iPhone, essentially, but they didn't even try. But you'll hear about BlackBerry because they tried and they failed. But the history will always remember them, right? History will remember Apple because they came up with the iPhone and they were successful, right? So always when it comes to anything in life, I prefer to be a person who tries and fails than a person who basically never tries at all, right? And when it comes to trying and failing, right, one of the things which I think and I hold very close to myself, right, is the fact that you only fail if you give up, right? And you only fail at something if you do something and you learn nothing new, right? That's a failure. So, when you're doing a startup or anything in your career, right, everything is an experiment, right? Because the definition of an experiment is anything that you do where you don't know the results, right? So everything is an experiment. And an experiment is only a failure scientifically if it doesn't give you any new learnings, right? So same way about your startup or your life decisions, basically, right? Never a failure until you give up, right? Only a person who basically decides that okay, I can't go on has basically accepted defeat and failure. But if you're a person who never accepts defeat or failure, just keeps learning, at some point in time, all of these learnings are going to come in clutch, basically, right? And give you, crazy amount of compounded ROI, right? Because there's never a wasted experience, right? At that point in time, you may feel in life that it's all pointless and, I don't understand, I'm failing. But as long as you're learning something new every single time, At some point in your life, it will all come back to you. All the stars will connect, and then you will basically look at these failures as being stepping stones, right? So as an example for me as well, right? I've had, I fail every single week, right? As an entrepreneur, right? You're constantly pitching, you're constantly selling, you're constantly hiring, and you're constantly facing rejection, right? But I don't look at this anything as being personal, because I know I'm doing this and I'm doing my best. Right? That's my focus, right? And as long as I have a great team next to me, and we are constantly learning from these various experiments that we do, we are in great shape, right? That's how you kind of think.
So, as a philosophy student, I see your halo outlook towards life so inspiring. So, susceptible to Gen Z culture, we have seen your tweets and interviews, and I've noticed that you've particularly focused on women at work and leadership. So, from an entrepreneur's point of view, what piece of advice would you like to give to women who want to begin such adventures?
Just do it, right? Very honestly, right? Because ultimately, I think I'll give you our own examples, right? And essentially in the company today, I think we're probably the only tech company I know of, essentially, which has majority team members being women, right? And people always ask us like, how did you go about doing this, right? As if it's some huge achievement in life. The reality is, it's actually super simple. If you want to basically, people talk big game about wanting to support women and all of these things, right? It's actually very simple. If you really believe in this, right, have women leaders and women CXOs, right? The minute you do that, right, that's the only thing honestly you need to do in one simple line, because then the whole company will become women centric, women friendly. Because we've seen this, that women also, when it comes to accepting offers, right, women tend to accept offers from us because their manager is going to be a woman, right? Or they see a CXO who's a woman and they get inspired that this company will get my mindset, right? uh, so it's pivotal, right, that you kind of do these things. When it comes to women and wanting to succeed, honestly, the world is your oyster, right? Because the reality is that most companies uh, don't even understand basically this concept of diversity, right? Because to me, I'll not talk so much about women, because to me, most importantly, it's about diversity, right? Diversity has so many advantages, right? Because fundamentally, it gives you different point of views, right? Whether it's, imagine if you have a company of all women, right? That's also not great, because you'll not have the opposite, you'll not have a man's view at all, right? Which will bias your product completely. Same point in time, if you have all men as well, that's again a disaster. It's always important to find that balance, right? And having both the voices heard to result in the best product possible. And it also depends on the kind of product you're building. I'll give you an example. Right now, I get this very common question from a lot of entrepreneurs and startups, basically building companies where the target audience is women, and they have 90% men in the company, right? And I'm like, that's a guaranteed way of you failing, essentially, right? Because you don't understand only who you're building it for. You have to, depending on who you're building it for, firstly, you need to have that kind of mindset inside your own company, right? Like as an example at Apollo, firstly, why is it so important? I mean, there are two aspects of it, right? One is we are a for-profit company, so it's not like we're doing charity by hiring anybody, right? We are hiring purely on the basis of merit. But the reason why there are two reasons why we've ended up in this situation, right? Reason number one is we hire for diversity because it results in better ROI, right? Because it results to better execution, better products, right? Because that multiple point of views is very important, especially for a company like us who's basically creating a platform for providing credit to 90% of the balanced Indians, right? And in India, there's 50% women and 50% men. So it would be crazy to build, for entire India and have only men or women only in the company, right? Because then you're never understanding the opposite person's point of view. So that's point one. Point two is the fact that also, it's a huge unfair advantage that we have actually built up now when it comes to hiring, right? Because now, if there are two companies now, by the way, which are giving offer letters to a potential team member that we want to hire, and they happen to be a woman, they want to join us more than the other person, right? Because they see that this place is extremely women friendly. And what I mean by women friendly is basically they're seeing other women in powerful positions, right? So it's not like some random, like, they've been hired for some, uh, a small job or something. My co-founder is a woman. The person who leads our credit is a woman. The person who leads operations is a woman. Our head HR is woman. In the tech team, we have 50% women. Like, it's a very, very clear outline, and we are very, very proud of that, right? Because ultimately, this has given us a huge unfair advantage when it comes to hiring, right? Because now, in such a competitive hiring world out there, right, if there are reasons other than monetarily wise that a person wants to join you because they relate with your vision, it's a huge, huge, huge ROI, right? So as an example, like, a lot of investors also ask me this question, right? Like, you know, who cares about, the ratio, etc., etc. I tell them that I completely agree with you. Who cares from a charity perspective? But if you want to run a successful company, right? And for me, success is defined by metrics. If you don't have diversity, you are bound to failure, right? So it is not out of charity. It is not out of some sense of being Mother Teresa. It is about basically doing the right thing, for the company's success. And in order to do that, right, it would be crazy for me to not tap into this amazing talent pool which is, available. And for some reason, some crazy companies out there are ignoring this talent pool. But I don't care, because honestly, for me, we've realized that this talent pool is phenomenally talented, right? And it's for some reason underserved in India. But I think that's honestly going to be I think there are many companies like us, by the way, who are going to put more and more case studies out there, where it wouldn't surprise me if there would be more and more tech companies also in the future, where the ratio would be the way it is in Apollo, where majority of the team is actually women centric, right from the leadership to every single department in the company.
Thank you so much for engaging answers, sir. Women in STEM is always an inspiration. My chat box has been spammed by the audience. They have so many questions for you. So I'll take one from Khyati Parikh. She says, "Thank you for the session, sir. I have a question. Even if we identify a problem and have an idea to solve the same, but we don't have the know-how to do so, maybe because of our unrelated education and professional experience background, how do you overcome this limitation?"
So, very honestly, this is what I said, right? Like, if you ever have the hopes of, getting into entrepreneurship, train yourself, right? And if you work in other startups, right, and what I say mean by other startups is companies which have compact teams, right? You'll be given a lot of roles and responsibilities, and you'll become very comfortable tackling problems which are ambiguous in nature, right? Because by default, startups are basically a place where you make decisions by only having 60-70% of the information available, right? You have to be really, really good at ambiguous decision making, and you have to have the ability and knack to make the right decisions in this ambiguous situations, right? And that's what makes a great leader, right? So my suggestion to you is embrace this ambiguity, right? Initially, maybe when you're just starting out your career, this ambiguity can feel a little bit daunting, because when you're in college, right, you don't have this, right? So there are two big problems, right? When you go to college to being an entrepreneur directly, in college you're given marks for effort, and number two, in college teachers kill out ambiguity, right? Because every time there's ambiguity, you go and ask the teacher, they'll answer your question and at least give you a very sharply defined problem. These two things don't exist in the real world, right? Real world doesn't give you marks for effort. You can learn things, and then compounding at one point in time will give you back. But in the short term, there's nobody patting you on the back saying, "Well done," right? Even if it just results, right? Number two is the fact that you have to be okay with ambiguity in problem statements, right? So be comfortable in that, right? If you want training to be okay with these two aspects, right, work in other startups until you are very comfortable in this kind of environment, right? And once you are, I promise you, then these kind of questions won't daunt you anymore. This will be normal, right? Where I have an idea, I want to solve it, but I don't know exactly how. I'll figure it out. That's going to be your mentality after you work in startups for a while.
So your insights have given us such an impactful outlook towards entrepreneurship. I am so inspired. So with this, we have reached an end of today's session, and it was really nothing less than incredible. On behalf of our entire team, I extend my gratitude to you for accepting our invitation and enlightening us with your words. Thank you so much for your time. We hope to host you in the future as well. Please have a good day. Thank you, everyone, for joining in.
Thank you so much, guys. Best of luck. See you. Bye bye.
Thank you, sir.